Hi, I'm Maxine and this is Dianne Case. We're mother and daughter, and we both grew up, we spent large parts of our lives in Wynberg, and we're both writers. And I think as a result, Wynberg often features in our work. I know my mom is busy with a book on Wynberg right now. Mom?
Yes, I'm writing about my childhood in Wynberg. It was a very different Wynberg to the Wynberg we know today. And my mother and father bought their house in Wynberg about 68 years ago. So we saw many developments. We saw the Lakshirama growing out of the soil. We knew, we lived in a tiny road called Dreyf Street. I'm sure as many people know about Wynberg, more people don't know about Dreyf Street. There were three houses actually in Dreyf Street. It's between Mars Road and Park Road, and opposite what was then the parking area of the Lakshirama. So that was our little corner. At the back of us, we lived on the corner of Dreyf Street and Mars Road. At the back of us was a big field in those days. At the far end was the stables where horses were stabled, and to the right of that was a field that was later developed into a park. It was in Bats Road, that park in Bats Road, and next to it was the wash house, where people used to come and drop off their washing in the morning and pick it up later. And we used to play there. We were aware that it was wrong, but after hours, when the wash house closed, we used to just walk there and swing on the lines, and we used to catch tadpoles where the water used to drip off the washing and little pools used to form. So yeah, that was the corner where we lived.
So was that near to Mr. Bats's grave?
Yes, that field and a park. His grave was a big tomb in those years, and you know, everybody, the children in the neighborhood used to play hide and seek, and some used to jump into this tomb, which was a big thing. And the rumor was that he was buried with his horse, his dog,
and his snake.
And his snake. Yeah, in this tomb. And there were bones and stones and things in this tomb, and it didn't seem to bother anyone.
Human bones, animal bones, or just...
I don't know, to us they were bones.
Okay.
And we, as children, we could say, well, that looks like a dog, that looks like a snake. Maybe that's the old man's head, even if it was just a stone. But today there's a gravestone there where he was...
At least there was when I was growing up. I don't know if...
The gravestone... Oh, the tomb was gone by then. But it was...
But we should actually check if it's still there. We haven't been to that park in years.
I've seen it. I've seen the gravestone. It was a big deal because it was a sort of meeting place. My mother says during the war, the rations would be delivered there. Like you would go and you'd collect your rations. I think the rations was butter, one of the things. I'm not too sure what
Cod
else.
liver oil. She said when she was a child they used to get cod liver oil.
Okay, cod liver oil.
To make them strong.
Yeah.
To, I think, like some vitamins, something.
No, you know what, the old people used to have the saying, you must give a child cod liver oil as hy hartlywig is.
Okay.
So you get that?
No, I don't.
Yeah, they used all their oils. They used, like if a woman was presumed to be beyond a due date to give birth, they would give her a bottle of castor oil to drink. That's what they did with Uncle Wayne.
Okay.
And I remember my mother walking up and down Mars Road, you know, and when she came back, and her friends were there.
In those days, babies were born at home, right?
Babies
nurses.
were born at home, yeah.
And there used to be a nurse in Wynberg. Two nurses.
Yeah, and they used to come on their bicycle. The one used to come on a bicycle, and nurse's uniform, and it was excitement if you see the nurse going in and the baby's coming somewhere. So yeah, that's where we grew. And on that same field, the mobile library used to come every Friday because we were not allowed to go to the Wynberg library. Remember, it was apartheid then, so it was on the other side of the main road. And you know what, as a child I used to walk with my dad and I would stare at this library because we read a lot. My children also read a lot. Maxine was quite the reader.
Well, I remember going to the library, so things must
one
have
of the
changed.
earliest things. Yeah,
But
by the time. Yeah, but then we were living in Lansdowne and you went to Janet Boyle.
No, but I remember Wynberg Library. I remember there was always opera playing from upstairs.
Yeah.
It almost had a cathedral-like feeling.
You see, and it was...
Although it's so ugly from the outside, if I'm allowed to say
we
that.
didn't say that. It was all gloss and fantasy when I was
Well,
a
it was
child.
very beautiful in those days. It's a bit green now, I think.
Maybe apple green paint was in a special somewhere. Maybe. Yeah. So, yeah.
And you went to Batswood,
I went to Batswood.
which was obviously, I guess, named after Mr. Bats.
Yeah, you know Bats Road. Mr. Bats, his staff lived this side of Wynberg. And also, from the time of the slaves being freed, many cross-race, if you want to use race, cross-cultural people were sort of left with communities here. So a slave woman's child with a white boy, with the masters, with his sons, those children were given to families in Wynberg and they were raised this side. So as apartheid approached and as the what's the Group Areas Act, as that came into force right around Cape Town, Wynberg stood out like a sore thumb. They did not touch Wynberg. From Broad Road to South Road, from Ottery Road to Castletown Road. It was like that tiny, tiny postage stamp size pocket that was just left untouched. And it used to come up in conversation. I know my mother's sister and her family lived in Plumstead. And her husband, my aunt's husband, had been a music teacher during the non-apartheid years. And then with apartheid, they were reclassified. But of course, their families were so mixed that time. I know my mother's grandmother on the one side was Dutch, and her grandfather from her father's side was French. And the French side was a prisoner of war that escaped into the hills in Simonstown and was absorbed in the community there, who had been slaves who had been set free. And that's how they worked their way this way. And my grandfather's mother, I think, was married to a German. After that, his name was Rietmüller. So that's how they came to be in Wynberg. And that house still stands. They had taxis on the rank. And it was really, really funny.
Your grandmother's house, great-grandmother.
Yeah. It's in Gosport Road, opposite Batswood.
I think that's what's so great about feeling rooted in a place. I travel a lot and have lived out of South Africa. And it's crazy to think that our family's roots go back to what, to the 1800s at least.
Yeah.
They belonged to the same church, St. John's, which I think was built around the 1830s. I think they were one of the first families. Family graves still exist. in the old cemeteries near to St. John's, or well, near to Wynberg Court, I guess.
That cemetery.
And so just this connection to the place is so interesting, especially when I think many of us live such transient lives, and you know, so many people have immigrated and are continuing to leave the country, and that sense of connection is really strong and special.
Yeah. So, what are we talking about?
What do you want to talk about?
No, you need to talk about how you used to sit with your granny.
Yeah, I mean, I was very lucky that I had a wonderful relationship with my grandmother, my mother's mother, who really enjoyed telling me stories of the old days. She had 9 other grandchildren, but we had a special connection because I was a reader like her, and I used to ask the questions. And when I was older, I'd write down her sayings and her recipes. So I'm very grateful that I still have that. I mean, I haven't made it since she passed away, but I would know how to make her Christmas pudding, for instance, or confit. You don't make those things.
No, okay.
But you can.
Okay, yes, okay.
And I think, you know, grandchildren have a special relationship with their grandparents. I see it with my mother.
You know, I never had grandparents, not on my mother's side or my father's side. So I didn't have that comfort because I saw that with my children and my mother.
So, you know, just having that connection to a previous generation, and she didn't grow up in Wynberg, but she would tell us the stories, and
of her grandfather, the wood merchant, her customers in Wynberg.
I mean, there's some really macabre stories as well, like her grandfather who got run over by a train?
Yeah, the French guy, he died on the railway line. Of course, that time it was just open rail and crossing there. Some people had the cheek to say he was drunk.
That's so rude. But you know, the weird thing is, I think it was quite common that people would just get knocked over by a train, driven over by a train.
Oh, I thought you were saying that they would get drunk.
Maybe in your family.
No. Yeah.
Talking about drunk, I don't know if you want to share the story about. So my mom is largely a teetotaler, and I'm a teetotaler, but she really knew the bars of Wynberg back in the day very well.
Yeah. You see, obviously, if you look at me, you can see there's something Indian there. In fact, there's a lot of Indian there. So we had this problem when my parents got married. You know, Indians were not allowed to be in the Cape.
Oh, they were limited, I think, to 2 areas.
I know when my daddy travelled, he was here illegally because he couldn't buy the house in Wynberg, so he had to get himself a coloured identity card. And then they bought that house. But we were a peculiarity because we were different. Most people were devout Muslim or devout Christian. No, not like that. We were non-religious, but because my dad was Hindu, his origins are in Hinduism. And he looked different, and we all looked different. So we were not like other people in that he worked away from home. He came home on a Monday evening. He left on a Wednesday morning. And I must tell you, my mother was a bridge champion. She played bridge on a Monday night, and she played bridge on a Wednesday night, sometimes on a Thursday, most often over the weekend, socially, but competitively in the week. So it was so strange for many people that as my dad walked in on a Monday, my mom walked out. But then I would sit with him, and my siblings would sit with him, and we would play rummy for 5 cents, and he would win all our money. First give us the money, win all our money, and give it back to us. Anyway, where we lived, it was like people who were hidden, you know, who weren't actually qualified to be, what was it then? There was the Cape Coloured and the so-called coloured.
Other coloured.
Other coloured. So behind us was a definitely Afrikaans man, and his wife was less than white. She's probably a mixture. But those people were hidden all over Wynberg, and I think that many in government, in the nationalist government, like we were related to my mother's sister's husband, who was in the Nationalist Party and campaigned for them. But because they had so many, this is just my assumption, so many people in the bloodline who lived in Wynberg, Wynberg was untouched. I don't say it is, I assume that.
You speculate.
Yeah, I speculate that. Yeah, so, yeah.
Back to the bars.
Oh, so I told you my mother's family owned taxis.
Yes.
So.
Sedan taxis.
Yeah, in those days. So, at Wynberg taxi rank. So my dad, you know what, he was an older father. And he really thought the sun shone out of my eyes and my hair and everything. So he used to come and fetch me when I was at school in Sub A. He would wait for the school to come out, he alone. And then he would fetch me. If it was school holidays, we would go from home. And we would stop at Joe's Cafe, which was next to the terminus up at Witteboemer. The top of Park Road where it gets to the main road was this terminus of cobblestones that the buses used to turn around there and go back. So right next to the terminus was a fish shop, Joe's Cafe. So he would buy me a packet of hot chips, and we would go and sit there on the corner of Constantia Road. I'm not sure what it was called. I think it was the Wynberg Hotel. Then he would go into the bar and have a couple of, I don't even say beers because he drank cane. He'd have a few drinks, and I would sit on the step there and eat my hot chips. And when it was done, I would stand in the doorway and shout, "Daddy, come, I'm finished." Then we would move along, and the next stop would be the Kogels Hotel. But along the way, we would look into the shops, and he loved buying presents for everyone. Lovely, he'll buy it for somebody. And so we would be laden with parcels as we moved along. He'd be walking a little bit from side to side and I'd be holding his hand. And there at the Kogels, opposite was Sunrise Bakery. They made the most delicious ice cream. Homemade ice cream. I'm sure all people had homemade ice creams there. These shops, because I've never tasted that kind of ice cream again. And it was quite a landmark, because on Sunday nights, everyone queued there for fresh rolls, because there were no pre-deliveries over the weekend, you know, for work and for school. So he'd buy my ice cream there, and then he'd go and have his next couple of shots there at the bar. And when my ice cream was finished, I would call him again. And he would come, and then we'd move along again, walk past all the shops, greet all the ladies in the shops. And I felt so proud of him, like, gosh, everybody knows this man and he's so popular. And then we go to the next one, which was, I think it was called the Railway Hotel, near to Ackermans, where Ackermans was that time. And there he would buy me, there was a bakery that time called Cardi's. And he would buy me a whole apple baked in a pastry case with glazed icing on top. And I'd sit there, and I mean, I'm really stuffed, but I would eat it. And then when he's finished there, I'll call him again. And then we would walk down Station Road to the Royal Hotel. And that was our last stop, because by then we were both finished and we had too many parcels. But he would go in there and I would probably be messing with the chocolate or whatever else he brought me there. And then he would come. But then his legs struggled to get to the ground and the parcels. And there was this one taxi driver who loved seeing him. He had a very straight, miserable face, this man. But he knew this was a good deal. So he'd help my dad into the taxi, help me in, and of course my daddy was more holding on with his hands. And then he would take us home. So the first thing he did this thing, they had this thing on the dashboard. And it was go to 2 and 6. So that was the fare, 2 and 6. And then we would get to our house. But this man, the taxi driver in his white coat with his thing on it, he was in a frantic rush to get all the parcels out and to get my daddy out, because my daddy paid with £1, which was then about R2, and the fare was 25 cents. And my daddy would say, keep the change. But my mother, when my mother heard the taxi, she would send my little brother to tell this man, my mommy asked for the change. And he used to get so cross. And then I found out afterwards, he was actually her cousin, the taxi driver. Yeah, because his father and my mother's father were brothers. So, but obviously he was white, you know. So I had to keep that racial distance. It was really a scream. And my daddy couldn't care. And the money used to fall out of his pocket as he used to get up. And this man used to hurry and just carry the parcels over the gate. Yeah, like my dad was the last to have to carry it. Yeah, they were such lovely days. Really, the most beautiful days. You know, so innocent and so sweet. And I didn't even understand how people used to ask, does your daddy drink? Now, what do you know about that? Drink water, Coke. Yes, of course he drinks. We all drink. You all drink? Yeah. Oh, mad days. Maxine, you met my dad when you were a baby. He met you. Yeah. But he was a special person. He didn't ever raise his voice or shout or, well, I suppose he's into background, Hindi. Yeah, come in, let's talk about the bad stuff. The things you did with your mom.
Well,
The books, the people you hated.
I don't think that's really about Wynberg. So
It's not about Wynberg, but it comes out of that library.
I'll talk. Well,
Yeah.
my first book was about growing up during the state of emergency in the 1980s. And I think it was a child's view of things that they didn't understand and things that adults didn't speak about to children. So I think we were raised to know what was happening in the world, but I think it was also a time when we didn't know what was happening because the government controlled the media, they controlled information. So we would sometimes hear about what's happening streets away from family in Canada, who would see it on their TV news. But really what struck me as a child, the discordance of seeing soldiers in the street looking for people, growing up where you'd see Caspers parked outside the school. And I think as I grew up and tried to make sense of that time, because it was a terribly insecure time as well, you know, we knew that soldiers were bad, police on the streets were bad, and you know, kids were getting arrested, detentions without trial, and trying to make sense of that. And I think Wynberg had a strong activist history, And so just really what I described was what we'd lived through and other people had lived through, and that terrible fearfulness. But I think there was also a lot of hope.
But you remember the time when all the houses had lit a candle at the gate for the Wynberg 7?
And I remember also the Free Mandela signs all over Wynberg.
And Foster's adjuster.
Oh, I remember that.
On the Lachurama wall, somebody sprayed Foster's adjuster.
The Lux always had like the slogans. So
yeah.
we became aware, I think, from a pretty young age. And I think I also remember the segregation that maybe people a bit younger than me wouldn't remember, like running for the trains on Witterboma Station, and knowing that if you get there late, you can't get in the first carriage because it's for whites only. I remember the whites only benches, and that really that stayed with me, because I get really frustrated when I talk to friends who didn't have those restrictions, and they say really blithely, oh, you know, we didn't know apartheid existed, or we didn't know it was so bad. And I think I never had that privilege of not knowing, because I really knew where I could go and where I couldn't go, where I could sit and where I couldn't sit. And I think that's important to acknowledge in our country's history, this extreme hurt, and I think that it really, the inequality that exists today is rooted in that. So we've got a lot to deal with as a nation, but I think Wynberg was really a microcosm of South Africa for me.
Yeah, it was largely. It's what happened beyond, and it started then. I know, yes. Well, we do go back when, when my grandparents got married. Now, you can talk about that because I don't know it as well as you do. The slave story coming in there.
Yeah, I mean, we were raised, again with my ma's story, about her grandmother, who was not born a slave. She was born after slavery had ended, but just because an institution ended, the practice continued. So she was the master's child from the servant, so just a different name. And they also lived in Wynberg in, is it Wolf Street?
Yeah,
Wolf Street.
On top.
Yeah. And that man had daughters from his wife, but this girl was raised in the house. I think his wife had died by then.
Yeah.
So that's how she could be raised in the house. But his daughters still lived there, and this was their half sister, but they were.
Yeah.
They
were legitimate.
But Ma used to have a word for them, the Noyans.
Annoyance, yeah. The thing is that...
Does that mean the ladies?
Yeah, the madams.
The madams.
They allowed her the privilege of living in the house, though they were emphatic that she would not be allowed to be educated. So she was not literate. That
was sad, because when I was trying to research my family history, I found her will in the archives. So, I mean, she eventually married to Samuel, who was a wood merchant, and then moved to Grassy Park because there were lots more trees there for his business. So she was born and raised in Wynberg, but then moved.
These customers were still in Wynberg.
And then she would come or send her grandchildren or children to these half-sisters of hers every week to give them a cake she had baked. And I thought that's also so sad.
Was an orange cake, she
said. You know that?
Yeah, she said they wanted an orange cake.
That this connection to family that's not family, and people would treat you probably not very well, but possibly there was affection on both sides. I mean,
maybe there was, but they might have been indoctrinated as well.
Yeah, but And Ma used to also speak about how that man had left her money, and she used to collect money from the post office every week or every month.
Every month.
From some legacy, and then of course that post office went down and there was no record. Was that the post office in Plumstead? I think.
Yeah, it was constantly away. The thing is that because of apartheid, so also you can imagine how the division came, because there were white children and there were children who were not as white. Like in my mother's family, my mother married my father, so definitely she was not white, but her siblings were, you know, and the same with her mother's family. They were all not reclassified, some of them just changed their names.
And some moved to what was then Rhodesia.
Yeah, and did well there. And many of them, they denied where they came from. So there was this yellowwood Bible with the will in it, 4 mega millions in a bank in Holland, that the one destroyed because it listed the family line, and there were these slave mothers also in there. So they in order to protect their children, they'd rather say no to the money, but yes to the white. You know, it was sad. This Wynberg story is largely a part of apartheid that was never really explained or shared, because what people out there know about apartheid is the brutality. They don't know the bottom line.
The pettiness as well.
Yeah, that really, you know, my mother was...
The divided families. I mean, I know you've written about it in one of your books, but tell the story of going to visit Auntie Joyce.
That was so funny. You know, my mother's sister and her elder sister, the uncle I told her about, well, they had an Afrikaans name even, and they lived in Plumstead, which is like a spit away from us in Wynberg.
Yeah, we live close to the border of Wynberg and Plumstead.
Yeah, because we more Verdorme than Wynberg. So we used to sometimes meet in the supermarket. The first Checkers had opened in Southfield. Oh, you know, they were identical, except my aunt had this red hair and blue eyes.
I'm short side of the bottle.
I'm not arguing. Nasty. And they used to be so happy to see each other. Well, they were sisters. And they used to chat and hug and all that. And as soon as someone came in the aisle, they would turn away from each other. And I used to marvel, because the noses are the same, you know, the features are the same. What are you trying to run away from? Anyway, when they bought the house in Wynberg, in Plumstead, before then they used to come and visit us. Then they bought the house in Plumstead, and she was so excited. She wanted my mother to come and see the house. And then my uncle came to fetch us, but it was midnight. And he had that car that you had to crank. I don't know if you remember that, with the running boards on the side. It was quite an occasion for us now to be, and at the dead of night, you know, for children. So anyway, we went there and he just, shh, you children must be quiet. So now we came to the top of the road, and he switched the engine off, and the car rolled quietly down, quietly, and don't bend the doors. Went into the house, and it's all dark. And then he lit a match, and you could look quickly and say, wait, I didn't see it. Shh. Okay, shh. It was all about being quiet. It was the funniest thing. But you know, my father was cross when I told him that we went in the dark and we had to be so quiet. He said, "You should never have taken my children, you know, in the first place, yeah." And he went off because like treating them to believe that they are less than. They are not less than. You know, those people are less than because they are ashamed of who they really are. So that was something, yeah. My dad was special, my mother was very cheeky. As I said, she was the champion, bridge champion. Went to a white hairdress. I'll tell you, under the subway. Yeah, those were strange years. But we had such fun. Oh, we had such fun. And my daddy's family came to visit us once, but then it was a little bit more relaxed. I think by then the islands had been built and Indian people were allowed to live in islands. And they came to stay. But it was like a culture enlightening for us. And this is really where we come from, you know. Which we lived this compromised life. My mother being her, my father being him. And we somewhere in between. Yeah. Well, we had a great childhood. We had wonderful neighbors, mostly different people.
Except for the one behind you.
Yeah, we used to fight a lot with the one behind us because he used to say he was going to report us. And like, report us for what? Indian people are not allowed to live in Wynberg. That's what he was going to report us for.
Is he the one who had a goat?
Yeah, he was an Afrikaner. He shouldn't have been there either if we want to follow the rules. And he had his Afrikaner ways. He had a goat, he had a sheep, he had a pig. All in his little backyard. His poor dog.
In his farm ways.
Yeah, his dog was tied to a piece of chain because I don't know if it wanted to kill the other animals or what. Yeah, strange, eh? But we lived in an old house. We lived a very privileged and protected childhood. You know, we didn't really need public transport. My dad did. We traveled to Stellenbosch. And that was sad because I used to meet him on the station and walk into the station on a Wednesday morning. Now the station would be full. Of course, he couldn't sit on the bench and he had sore legs. And he used to go from the one leg to the other leg. And when he got into the train, it was so squashed, the non-white carriages. And I always panicked that he would fall, you know, on his ride from there to Salt River where he changed to go to Stellenbosch. Very sad. But we were very famous because of the Lakshurama. We saw all the shows. We always had to buy tickets for someone when the shows were sold out. So it was a playground kind of place. We knew we were in and out there. Yeah, lovely days. Was it still around when you were a child?
Of course it was still around.
So how long has it been closed?
I don't remember.
20 odd years at least.
Is it even
50 maybe?
No, I think it's much more recent. Maybe 20 years, but
Yeah.
what's happened to it now?
I see a big notice, Kismet parking. I don't know. There was a time they said it was going to be converted into a medical center. I don't know what happened.
It always had that unique smell.
Yeah.
Just musty and seats and closed.
Yeah. We used to go to the matinee shows there, and you know, through the movie suddenly you'll see a train on the screen, and then this man's tying this girl down, and then he gets up and he runs off, and she's like, "Where are you going?" He says, "I'm off to get my dairy made." He's screaming. Yeah, those were the days of family blocks and all of that.